Okay, so that's where we're going. Now, here's a visual. I love visual models. When I was a younger parent, I have 2 children, and when they were little, I would buy a bicycle. You know, you get a bicycle, you order it through Sears, Roebuck, or Amazon.com, and it comes in a box. And you open the box, and there are all these parts, and there are the instructions in kind of Japanese English, which I could never quite understand. So I put the words away, I open up to the page with the diagram, and okay, this screw goes into this bar goes over here. I put it all together, and even though there were 2 or 3 parts still in the box, the kids wrote off, and they survived. I'm a visual, I need graphic illustrations. Almost all of my books that I've written or edited kind of start with a model. We have a model of learning, a model of student development, a model of effective teaching, a model of student engagement. So I think in terms of models. Here's my model for comprehensive course design. In the middle, we're going to spend most of our time talking about, if that's my wife, tell her I'll be home soon. Okay. Plane's leaving tonight sometime. Don't wait for me. We'll spend most of our time in that middle part, outcomes, assessment, instruction, and then we'll talk about those influencing variables in not quite as much detail. Okay? So the first thing, what does backwards course design say? What did they say? Where do we start? The outcomes. Okay. So the first step in this process is determine what you want students to learn. What do you want students to know at the end of the course? What do you want students to be able to do with this knowledge? We're going to spend just a little bit of time in writing or talking about an approach to writing effective learning outcomes. Some of you have attended a whole day workshop on that here. Everyone else or other people at this workshop have touched upon writing student learning outcomes. So I'm just going to go through that pretty quickly here. So that's outcomes. In your packet, I have a task for you. I've been talking a lot. Now it's time for you to do some work. In your packet of material, you will find one handout that is entitled The Course Goals. I've survived 3 days without cheating on this. Hopefully one more day. There's something called the Course Goals Inventory. So we're going to start, it looks like this. Course Goals Inventory.
You don't have.
No.
Yeah, some of us don't.
No. Can I see what's in your packet there? Undo your paper clip. All right. Well, all the handouts are not in the packet. If you don't have the course goal inventory, can you sit next to someone who does have one? I have a couple of extra. I have one here. Okay. Show of hands again. Who does not have?
We have it, but it's unreadable.
No, that's not the same. That's not the course goal
The
inventory.
same one, but we can't read it.
You don't have.
Teaching goals.
Oh my goodness, it's there.
But we can't read it.
But you can't read it.
Unreadable.
Excuse me.
All right, I'm sorry.
Excuse me. We do not have the course kit.
few of us does not have the full course kit. They are missing.
I'm sorry, I apologize, you should have it. All right, so we'll move on. We can't do this activity because you don't have the materials. Apologize for that. This course goal inventory, if you ever do find it, if you ever do get it, can be a useful instrument in helping you to identify what the intentions are for the course that you're teaching. Before you get to the student learning outcome, you need to get an idea of what you want to accomplish in the course. These are some general course goals that the course goal inventory helps you identify. So my suggestion is, as you begin the course design process, you complete something like this course goal inventory just to reflect on what it is you want this course to accomplish. Now, different courses have different goals. If you're teaching an introduction to psychology class, maybe your goal is just foundational knowledge. You want to build a foundation for future information. If you're teaching a senior engineering design course, you want to go beyond just foundational knowledge. You want to develop higher order thinking skills, problem solving skills. So different courses have different general course goals. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And what I had hoped to do, what I've done in all the other days, is have you identify a course and start working through this course goal inventory to see if you can identify the goals for that course. But obviously we don't have that opportunity today. What you do have is a handout called 7 Principles of Good Practice in Undergraduate Education. That other handout that stands by itself. Let me borrow yours for a second. And this, you have this in your packet, I hope?
Yes.
Okay. You have this in your packet. Everyone hold it up. Let me see. Make sure. Yes, very good. Very good. All right. What you have in that handout is one of the most important documents in higher education. One of the most influential, seminal pieces of research done on higher education teaching. In the late 1980s, a number of organizations, the Pew Commission, the American Association of Higher Education, another bunch of these big think tank organizations commissioned Chickering and Gamson, 2 researchers, to get a group of people together, to get a team, 50 or so experts on teaching, on learning. And the question that was posed to them, can you, through looking at this research, identify principles of good teaching? Can we identify what good teachers do, no matter what discipline, irrespective of discipline? Can we boil them down into some characteristics, some things, good things to do when you teach? And they did that. And they came up with what are called 7 principles. And these are the 7 principles, and they're in that handout. Your handout not only has these 7 principles, but it has suggestions of what they mean, things that you can do for each of those 7 principles. So I suggest when you're developing a course that you have this handout right next to you. It's one of those pieces of information that you have when you're planning the course. And you use it as a template, as a checklist. Okay, does my course encourage active learning? Does my course encourage students working together? Does my course encourage some student-faculty interaction inside and maybe even outside the class using chat rooms and discussion forums and things like that? Does this course provide multiple ways of learning? Or does every student lockstep have to do the same thing to get a grade or to learn? Does my course give prompt feedback? Am I giving feedback to students on a regular basis to guide their learning? Typically, courses fall short on that. That's one of the aspects of teaching that we don't do a great job of. We give, and when we do give feedback, I'm not speaking of everyone, this is a generalization. When we do give feedback to students about their learning, it's negative feedback. It's not positive or facilitative feedback. Just think when you're marking a test, you're marking what's wrong. Do you often write down what's right or give them suggestions on how to correct the mistakes? You don't have time to do that. Here's a little psychological tip for you. Don't ever mark, grade, exams, tests, essays with red ink. Red is the color of blood. Red is threatening. Red is, you see a paper and it looks like I'm bleeding all over the paper. Red is intimidating. Red is threatening. Red is scary. Here's a suggestion. Use green ink. Green ink. More opening, you go on a green light, you stop on a red light. Women will learn this hopefully soon. You go on a green light, you stop on a red light.
They already know that. They already know that.
Yeah, I know
They
that.
have to learn all that.
I'm just trying to be humorous, trying to tease. Does my course emphasize time on task? In other words, is it well organized? Does one unit flow sequentially and logically to the next? Am I asking too much of my students or not enough of my students? And this, sometimes you don't know this until you teach the class 1 or 2 or 3 times. And then finally, do I communicate high expectations? Does my syllabus and my way of teaching extend positive invitations to students instead of negative invitations? Do I communicate in my course and in how I teach, you can do this? And am I enthusiastic? Do I show I have high expectations? Do I demand high expectations of myself? When I was a first-year student, I went to a fairly prestigious undergraduate institution, hard to get into. This is 40 plus years ago. We had a convocation the first day of class. Well, first, we came up a couple of days before the older students came. So we had this convocation, and we had speeches by this, and welcome to this wonderful place, blah, 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 blah. It was hard to get here. And then the dean of the college, some of you may have a similar experience. The dean of the college came and addressed us. He said, okay, everyone look to your left, look at the person sitting next to you, turn to your right, look at the person sitting next to you. In 4 years, one of the three of you won't be here. Building in, maybe he's trying to motivate us by fear of failure. All it did for me was to look at him and say, well, it's going to be him. And I know he was looking at me and he'd say, it's got to be him. And that guy over there is saying, it's got to be the other guy. And so we kind of already built in the first day of class this defensiveness, this competition, this sense of I have to not learn, but rather avoid failure. It's crazy. I hope you don't do that. Rather, it would have been much better in retrospect, looking back, for me personally, if he had come in and said, welcome to this wonderful, fine institution. You worked hard to get here. You demonstrated the ability to succeed. You can do this. We've designed a curriculum and 4 years of study to challenge you, but also to support you. Your teachers care about you. If you work hard, if you do the assignments, if you follow through, you will succeed. You will graduate. That would have communicated a much more positive, encouraging, motivating message to me. Some of you may be motivated by the fear of failure. To me, I'm motivated by the prospect of success. If I know I can do something, I'm going to work harder to attain that, rather than doing the minimum to avoid failure. All right, so that's what good courses have.
Excuse me?
Yes?
Sorry? For the previous slide, why these 7 principles are subjected to undergraduate education only? Because I assume that this session that we have is for course design, and this course design include both the undergraduate and the graduate courses.
Excellent point. Thank you for pointing that out. The original research and the original study and the original report was entitled 7 Principles of Good Practice for Undergraduate Education. However, years following that, people have asked that same question. Do these 7 principles transfer to postgraduate education, to professional education, to medical education, to international education? And the research says generally these 7 principles hold across any kind of education. So yes, thank you for making that observation. And if you Google, Google is the standard of finding information. You don't do anything. My kids don't do anything, go anywhere, say anything until they Google it. If you Google 7 principles of good practice, you'll probably find 500,000 hits. It's one of the most documented, discussed, implemented documents on higher education there is. And people have asked that and have researched that very question. Okay, so let's talk more about determining student learning outcomes. Give you a chance to read this, one of my all-time favorite comics. So this one boy's talking to the other, and his dog Stripe is there, and one boy says to the other dog, I taught Stripe how to whistle. And the other kid leans over and says, I don't hear him whistling. And the first kid says, I said I taught him. I didn't say he learned it. Now, what's the purpose of education? The purpose of education is for students to learn something. You could be the most charismatic, wonderful, organized, exciting, enthusiastic teacher, but if students don't leave learning something, you're wasting their time and your time. and the institution's money and society's investment, so learning outcomes are the key. That's what has to drive courses, that's what drives institution. ABET, any engineers here? Okay. I was involved 25 years ago when ABET was changing. I'm not an engineer, but I stayed in a Holiday Inn Select last night, so I know everything about engineering. I worked at an engineering institution for 12 years. My son's an engineer. Kind of rubs off. My wife is she engineers all of us. I was involved when ABET changed from basically an input accreditation process to an output accreditation process. ABET is the Accrediting Board of Engineering and Technologies. And typical accrediting agencies were in the ranking systems that are so prevalent today. Ranking systems, there's the Gulf State ranking system, there's left-handed teacher ranking systems, there's a ranking system for anything you want. Typically, if you look at them carefully, they're measuring what I call input variables. How many of the teachers have PhDs? How many books in your library? How many grant dollars do you bring in? All input. What about what happens to students? What about measuring what students are like at the beginning of their studies and what they're like at the end of the studies? And measuring the delta, the change. And so accrediting agencies are realizing that. SACS, I've been a reviewer for the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, accrediting, which may accredit you all, I don't know. But they're saying, what do you want students to learn? Determine your student learning outcomes, and then how are you going to measure them? We don't really care, and this is strange, we don't really care if you attain them. We just want to know how are you going to measure them and then what you're going to do with the results of that measurement. How are you going to improve the institution based upon what you found out about student learning outcomes. So it's learning that drives course design. What are the knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, skills you want your students to learn at the end of the course? Now, there are two levels of learning outcomes that need to be talked about. There's kind of the general course learning outcomes, the 15 or 20 learning outcomes that you want students to get as a result of this course. And then maybe each lesson, each unit could have its own learning outcomes that feed into those mega. You have micro and macro learning outcomes. So we're back to this diagram again. I mentioned this difference before. This is an important difference to kind of keep in mind. There are instructional objectives and student learning outcomes. Sometimes we get them confused. We put our instructional objectives where we think are instead of student learning outcomes. Try to maintain a difference between the two of them. All right. We have 4 minutes before a break. Now, most of us here have postgraduate degrees, right? Pretty much all of us have postgraduate degrees. We've spent many, many, many years learning, right? So, I'm going to give you a 15-minute break. I'm hoping and assuming that you can tell the difference between 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 minutes. So 15-minute break it's like one less than 16. One less than 16. And here's the issue. If you come in late, I just tack that on to the end product. So if you come in 5 minutes late, you owe me 5 minutes. If you come in 5 minutes late after the lunch, you owe me another 5 minutes. So we might not get done here until about 3 o'clock. Take a break.